Hi, welcome back. I'm sorry I have a little bit of a sore throat, but let's power through all of that. And let's look at April, which I think is my best month of the year because I saw a lot of films. Let's just get started. There's a lot to go through. The first one was Aquaman. It's a good film. It's not as memorable as some of the other films, but I think in the new DC films, in the DCEU films, they were never great to start with. I think even Wonder Woman was a fairly just slightly above par film. And in that same boat, I think Aquaman is also quite similar. It has some really nice visual elements. It has some good cinematography. It has a lot more character than some of the other films, but it's still not that great. Next, I watched two films which were slightly low budget films. These were the films that these filmmakers started out with. The first is Slacker, which is Richard Linklater's first film. It's a fairly unconventional format of telling a story, and it's there's really not a lot to say about the film. It's a very flowy story. It just goes from here to there to there to there to there, and it's not particularly mind blowing, but the concept is unique. But I think it's still worth a watch because it gave me some context to where Richard Linklater comes from, his entire school of thought on films. I think you can trace back to this film and you can see echoes of this throughout his other works. Next was Clerks, which is again a very small budget film. It was shot in a shop which the director had access to, and it was made on a very low budget. It sometimes it shows, but it's still a compelling story. It's not something that's really mind blowing. Some characters that actually spun off into becoming really like favorite characters and like having their own films. I did not really like them so much. I don't know why. I just wasn't a big fan. It's a good film. I think it's an inspiration. This film, because it shows how much a filmmaker can do with a small budget and with limited resources. But it's nothing to write home about. Next, I watched Rocky, which is it's everything you want in a sport film. But even more than a sport film, I think it's a romantic film. It's about him and the girl, and you see their affection, and you see his the way he wins the fight for her. It's very heartwarming, and I think that's something that most people overlook when they're talking about Rocky. They just focus on the punching and the violent aspect of it. But I think there's a lot of heart in this film, which is why I think it has become such an iconic film. Like all of the other boxing films which have become iconic, I think Rocky is a very nice example of how to do a sports film right. Next was Roma. Um, it's it's a film from Alfonso Cuarón. I am a huge fan of his. I've loved all of his films a lot, and I think this is a really heartfelt story. It feels like a very personal story, told by the filmmaker about his past, and it just feels like the most cinematic film that I've seen come out in the last couple of years. This film has incredible cinematography. Like Alfonso Cuarón has worked with one of my favorite cinematographers, Emmanuel Lubezki, Chivo, and when he had some other work, so he couldn't work on Roma. The Alfonso Cuarón just says, "Okay, I'll do the cinematography myself," and he does it, and it's so damn beautiful. It's crazy. I can't imagine the kind of skill, the kind of genius that you need to have to do something that beautifully. Just the wide shots, the sweeping crane shots. It's just it's absolutely unimaginable just thinking of how crazy it was to make that film, especially that scene at the end by the sea. And when you see the behind the scenes footage of how they actually had to build an extra pier and they had to put these cranes and things like that, it's absolutely crazy the amount of effort that they've put into this film. And the use of black and white. I am a huge fan of black and white, and I think it's used incredibly well here. Like you see a lot of Mexican films or films that are set in Mexico have this sepia filter, this really ugly yellow tinge to make it look like Mexico, to make it look like the past. And Cuaron just makes it black and white and it looks so beautiful. I remember scenes from this movie just when I'm walking about the streets and I'll just think of, oh my god, that was such a great shot. And it just shows the genius of the film. It's really a film that has really stayed with me a while, and I've watched it over and over again to try to capture something new every time. Speaking of black and white, I watched one of my favorite films, Mad Max Fury Road, in black and white. So the director, he actually made a black and chrome edition, as he calls it, which is that film which was so iconic in its use of color, this really vibrant orange and teal color, but even in black and white, the film is absolutely gorgeous. It Some of the impact that you have from the colors is not felt in the black and white edition, of course, but there is a different kind of a visual, striking impact that black and white just has. The contrast of these shots and the just the framing and the composition, I think shows through incredibly beautifully in black and white when you strip everything off its color. And I think that holds true for Roma as well as Mad Max Fury Road in its black and chrome edition. And I think in most modern black and white films. Next, I watched Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Rings. So here's a confession. I had never seen Lord of the Rings movies before this. I had tried watching the first one, Fellowship, a few times, but it's extremely long. Like it's a trilogy of films, and all of the films are over 3 hours long. And I don't know what I was thinking of, but I have the extended editions of all of the films. So they are really, really, really long. But this time I persevered through. I watched Fellowship of the Rings. It's not one of my favorites, and I didn't find it to be something that changed my life. But I can see the amount of effort that it took in 2000 and 2001 to make this kind of a film a reality, and just the sheer brilliance of Peter Jackson to actually just to take on this challenge. Like when I'm shooting a film and my budgets are like nothing, absolutely nothing compared to the budgets he's working with and the responsibility that he has, and I still have anxiety over spending that money and making sure that the film comes out all right. And this guy was working with millions on a franchise that has really, really ardent followers, that has really, really, fanatic levels of, fandom and community, and this feeling of it's your story. Lord of the Rings has a huge fan following, and Peter Jackson still managed to make it, and make it so well, is a testament to his genius. And I didn't like Fellowship of the Ring so much, but you'll see what I think about the other two films in the later videos. Then I watched Baby Driver. I The poster is actually out of frame, but that's again one of the films that I really love so much. I keep rewatching it. I think it's masterful in its use of music and its cinematography, and its use of color and its editing, in its character, the story and how it's told, the character arcs, the every part of it. I feel like there are some elements which are a little cheesy, but they're used sparingly and they're used really well. And the action scenes are really, they just keep you on the edge of your seat, but it's not thrilling, but it's really entertaining. And I think Edgar Wright is one of my favorite filmmakers just in general, because I think all of his work has been very unique. He's managed to make really entertaining, really wholesome films with a lot of creative and technical mastery, while also being fairly light-hearted in its things. He's not making a Schindler's List when he's making a film, but they're still so funny and rewatchable. I think just the chase scene, the first opening chase scene, is one of the best chase scenes in movie history, and I don't know. I'm a huge fan. Actually, we had a costume party last year in college, and I actually went as Baby Driver. I'll see if I can put a picture there. They call me Baby Driver. Next is Once by John Carney. It's a film about two musicians and them, forming a bond. But it never goes on the verge of a forced romance. The characters stay separate, and it's just this nice bond of really strong friendship that grows between these two artists. And I think it has some of the best music. I think the song from this film, which won the Oscar that year, which is Falling Slowly, is so beautiful and just so romantic. I can't even express how I feel about it. It's really good. And I like John Carney's future films also. Begin Again, I think, is quite nice. I'm a big fan of Sing Street. So yeah, it's a really good film and you must watch it more than just once. After that, I went sort of down a rabbit hole of documentaries. I don't know why I felt like watching a lot of Michael Moore documentaries. So I started with Where to Invade Next. It's a fairly unknown documentary of his. I think his most famous ones are Roger and Me and Bowling for Columbine and Fahrenheit 9/11. But Where to Invade Next is also quite good. Again, he's a very polarizing filmmaker, and I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan, but I do think there's some amount of merit to coaxing opinions out of people and coaxing you to think about a certain subject, even though his approach might be a little ham-fisted. I think it can still have an impact. And Where to Invade Next is quite nice in terms of its, especially the bits where he explores the education system in Finland and in other parts of Europe. It's a good documentary, but I feel like Michael Moore's personality can be something that can make you not watch it. Next, I watched Religulous. It's a documentary about atheism, about an atheist, going about the world and seeing how religions are, seen around the world. Well, I am an atheist, and I am not a huge fan of the entire idea of religion in general. But I think the documentary is a little more forceful in its approach, in the point that it's trying to take further. And I don't think that's the right way to do it. Next, I watched the famous documentary from Michael Moore, Bowling for Columbine. It's all about gun violence in America. And this film was actually made a long time ago, but I think it's still extremely relevant, especially in America. I think even for the rest of the world. Just the amount of gun violence that we see every day in the news is something that this film has tackled with a while back, and I think most of its points still stand. Going ahead with the Michael Moore films, I watched Fahrenheit 11/9. This was the sort of sequel to 9/11 that he made, which was about the Trump administration, and I think it's his most recent documentary. And again, it's a little forceful about its perspective. Next, I watched The Matrix, probably one of the best films in the world, according to IMDb at least. And it is a good film. I'd seen it a long time ago, so I just felt like it was a good time to revisit that. And I watched it and I had a good time. It's and especially because I have been reading a lot about simulacra and a lot of philosophical and sociological things recently. I think I had a much more nuanced opinion about the film, and I got to learn far more and interpret far more from the film itself. And I'm quite happy that I watched the film after a long time, and I think I really enjoyed it in a different way than I did before. Then I watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's an extremely entertaining film. You get these three characters who are constantly at wits with each other, they're constantly conflicting with each other. I mean, it's Sergio Leone probably at his best, telling a really having these crazy characters and telling a story that is quite entertaining. It's a long film, but it's really nice, and especially the last scene, the Mexican standoff, is amazing. Then I watched The Devil Wears Prada. Um, Not a big fan. Then I rewatched Gully Boy. And I think this time, the third time that I watched the film, I really appreciated a lot more of the elements that were in the film that I had sort of overlooked or that I had not given enough credit before. So, I mean, it stands. It's a good film and it's really well made. So, at this point, I sort of realized that it was just, I think, 20 days or 15 days till the release of Avengers Endgame. The poster is right there. So, I decided, because I had some free time, I decided I would do a marathon, an MCU marathon. So, yeah, I watched a lot of movies this month. Then I took a little bit of a break. I watched El Mariachi, which is a really low budget film that was made a long time ago. It's a decent film. It's not great, but again, it's like Clerks and Slacker. I think it goes to show how a filmmaker can make a decent film even with almost no money. Next, I watched Cop Car. This is mainly because I was looking at John Watts's filmography after watching Homecoming, and I was really taken by the idea of Cop Car. And I watched the film. It's about these two boys who steal a cop car, and adventure ensues. And it's a really well done film. I think it has good cinematography. It has a unique premise. The performances are really good. Kevin Bacon is really really good in it, and I would love to see more films from John Watts soon. Then I watched Badla. Um, it's a remake of a Spanish film. I haven't seen the original, but this film was not as entertaining. It just felt very convoluted. It was just, oh, is this right? Is that right? You know, the thing is, when you have an unreliable narrator in a film or in any kind of literature, it makes sense if there's one unreliable narrator, but when where there is no reliable person in the entire film, there is no impact. And also, despite all of that convoluted mess that was there, it's still predictable. I still knew what was happening. I knew what the end reveal was going to be. Then I watched Uri, the surgical strike. How's the Josh? Not so high, sir. Um, Not a big fan. It was decent. It was a fairly well made action film. Some sequences were good. Um, I'll not go into the political aspects of the film. I think that will make an entire video of itself. But not a big fan of this film. Not as much as I would have hoped to. I was actually expecting to really love this film, especially with Vicky Kaushal in it. But yeah, it was okay. Then I watched Crazy Rich Asians, which is exactly that. And it's a decent film. It's not particularly good, it's not particularly bad. It's something that you can just watch. It's just your typical rom-com, and I don't have much else to say about it. Then I watched Crazy Stupid Love. This is a film that I really like. It has some of my favorite actors in it. It has really good performances. It's a decent story, but it's really well told. It's funny. The end reveal is quite surprising, but also a little expected, which is why it's funnier. And yeah. And the last film of the month was About Time. It has some of my favorite actors again, and it's a really nice story. It's a very unique story. It's told really well, and despite being really funny and really entertaining, it also has a deeper philosophical, existential theme, something that it's trying to say, and it does it really well. I will not talk about it now because I think you should just go out and watch that film. So yeah, I watched 46 films in April. I also had one day when I watched 5 films. I think that's the most films I've seen in a day. I watched Captain America, The Avengers, Iron Man 3, Thor The Dark World, and Captain America The Winter Soldier. It was a bit of a free month that I had, and I watched a lot of movies, that's why, but overall, it was a nice month. I'll see you in the next one.